It was a calm Saturday afternoon in a high-end clothing boutique. The store was nestled in a bustling part of the city where wealthy clients came to shop for luxury brands. Soft jazz played in the background, and the smell of leather handbags and expensive perfumes filled the air. Among the shoppers was a young black girl named Aaliyah, about 15 years old. She wasn't here to buy anything for herself, not today. She clutched her phone and a small notepad, taking pictures of clothing tags and jotting down notes. Her big brown eyes sparkled with focus as she carefully examined a pair of shoes on display. Her father, James Carter, was waiting in the car outside. Aaliyah had asked for a little time to explore the store alone, wanting to choose the perfect gift for her aunt's birthday. She didn't look out of place in her neat jeans and a pastel hoodie, but some people in the store clearly thought otherwise. One such person was a sharply dressed woman in her mid-50s, her blonde hair styled into a perfect bob. She radiated an air of entitlement, her expensive pearl necklace glinting under the boutique's warm lights. Her name was Meredith. From the moment Meredith noticed Aaliyah, her expression shifted. She kept glancing at the girl with narrowed eyes, her lips pressed into a thin line. "What is she doing here?" Meredith muttered under her breath. She looked around, expecting someone else to notice, but nobody seemed to share her concern. Finally, she couldn't contain herself any longer. She stormed over to Aaliyah, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Excuse me," Meredith said, her tone icy. Aaliyah looked up, startled but polite. "Yes?" Meredith folded her arms and looked the girl up and down, her gaze dripping with disdain. "You shouldn't be here. This is a high-end store. I don't think you can afford anything here." Aaliyah blinked, her cheeks flushing. "I'm just looking around. I'm not bothering anyone." "You're making people uncomfortable," Meredith snapped, though no one else seemed to even notice Aaliyah's presence. "If you're not buying anything, you need to leave." Aaliyah's hands trembled slightly, but she held her ground. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I have every right to be here." Meredith scoffed, her voice rising. "Don't talk back to me, young lady. I know your type. You're just here to loiter or worse, steal. This isn't a place for people like you." Aaliyah felt a lump forming in her throat. She wasn't used to this kind of hostility, and it stung deeply. She glanced around, hoping someone would intervene, but the other shoppers seemed oblivious. "Please," Aaliyah said quietly. "I'm just here to buy a gift for my aunt." But Meredith wouldn't let it go. "Don't lie to me! I'm calling security!" Just as Meredith pulled out her phone, the boutique's glass doors swung open. James Carter walked in, his tall frame and confident stride immediately drawing attention. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his presence commanding yet approachable. "Dad!" Aaliyah called out, relief washing over her face. James spotted his daughter and smiled, but his expression quickly changed when he noticed her tearful eyes and the furious woman standing in front of her. "What's going on here?" James asked, his voice calm but firm. Meredith turned to him, assuming he was just another shopper. "This girl doesn't belong here. I was about to call security." James raised an eyebrow, his jaw tightening. "And why is that?" "She's clearly up to no good," Meredith said dismissively. "People like her don't shop in places like this." James took a deep breath, holding back the anger bubbling inside him. He looked at Aaliyah, then back at Meredith. "People like her? You mean my daughter?" The color drained from Meredith's face. "Your daughter?" "Yes," James said, his voice colder now. "And for your information, I'm James Carter, the CEO of Carter Enterprises, the company that owns this boutique." Meredith's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She stammered, I didn't mean any offense. I was just trying to protect the store." "Protect it from what?" James asked sharply. "A young girl shopping for her aunt's birthday? Or was it just the color of her skin that made you assume she didn't belong?" "I didn't mean—" Meredith tried again, but James cut her off. "Enough. he said. Your behavior is unacceptable. My daughter has every right to be here, just like anyone else. If anyone doesn't belong in this store, it's someone with your attitude. The entire boutique had gone silent, all eyes on the confrontation. Aaliyah stood beside her father, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. Meredith, thoroughly humiliated, mumbled an apology and hurried out of the store, her face flushed with embarrassment. James knelt down, bringing himself to Aaliyah's eye level. His strong, comforting presence seemed to shield her from the world. He placed a hand on her trembling shoulder, his gaze soft but filled with concern. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked, his deep voice steady and full of love. Aaliyah nodded slowly, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I'm okay now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She blinked, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. "Thank you, Dad, for being here." James gently wiped the tear away with his thumb. "You don't have to thank me," he said firmly. "You're my daughter, Aaliyah. No one has the right to make you feel less than what you are." His voice faltered for just a moment as he looked at her, his heart breaking at the thought of what she had endured. "I'm so proud of you. You stood tall in the face of hate, even when it hurt. That takes real courage." Unable to hold back her emotions any longer, Aaliyah wrapped her arms tightly around her father's neck. I don't understand why she hated me so much," she murmured into his shoulder. James held her close, one hand resting protectively on the back of her head. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "people let their ignorance and fear blind them. It doesn't make it right, but it says more about them than it ever will about you. Don't let anyone make you question your worth, okay?" Aaliyah nodded against his shoulder, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. In that moment, she knew that no matter how cruel the world could be, she would always have her dad in her corner. As they stood there, the boutique staff approached hesitantly, their faces pale with guilt and discomfort. The manager, a young woman with dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, stepped forward first. "Mr. Carter, Miss Aaliyah, I want to personally apologize for what happened here today," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We should have intervened sooner. What you experienced was unacceptable, and we'll make sure it never happens again in this store." Another staff member chimed in, his voice earnest. "We've already spoken to security, and will be reviewing our policies to ensure everyone feels welcome here. I hope you can accept our sincerest apologies." James stood tall again, his arms still wrapped protectively around Aaliyah. He gave the staff a curt nod. "I appreciate your apology," he said, his tone professional but edged with a quiet authority. "But remember, apologies mean nothing if they're not followed by action. This store represents my company, and I won't tolerate discrimination in any form. Make sure this never happens again." The staff nodded quickly, visibly relieved that James wasn't harsher in his response. As James and Aaliyah walked out of the boutique, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the busy street. Aaliyah clutched a small gift bag tightly in her hand, the present she'd finally chosen for her aunt. She walked with her head a little higher, her steps a little lighter, despite everything that had happened. "Dad?" she said softly as they approached the car. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Do you think people like her will ever change?" James paused for a moment, unlocking the car door but not getting in yet. He looked at his daughter, her youthful face filled with a mix of sadness and hope. "Maybe some of them will," he said honestly. "But whether they change or not, what matters most is that you don't let their hate change who you are. You're smart, kind, and stronger than you know. The world needs more people like you, Aaliyah." She smiled, the kind of smile that carried a spark of resilience. "Thanks, Dad," she said, her voice steady now. As James got behind the wheel, a silent vow formed in his mind. He had always used his influence and success to better his company and provide for his family. But today, he had seen firsthand how far society still had to go. He wasn't just going to address what happened in that boutique. He was going to fight for a world where no child, no person, would ever have to endure what Aaliyah did. And as they drove home, the city lights flickering to life around them, Aaliyah leaned back in her seat, her heart lighter. She had faced cruelty and ignorance, but she had also discovered her own strength and the unshakable bond she shared with her father. Together they would stand tall, no matter what the world threw their way.